6 German fighters just crossed the tree line at 1,400 feet, closing at 210 mp. Strafing formation, wingman left, flanker right. One of them is already banking into attack position. The airfield scramble tower screams into the comms, "Too late, abort, takeoff, abort." But 19-year-old Lieutenant Dale Rensler can't stop now. His P-47 Thunderbolt is rolling muddy, underpowered, gear half-locked, his ground speed just 68 mph. Not enough. Not yet. The oil is too cold. The manifold pressure's unstable. He should have warmed the engine for 40 seconds minimum. He had 12. The runway ahead is wet, and half the squadron hasn't even started engines. He has no wingman, no time, and no runway left. So he slams forward a trick he was told never to use. A cold start surge he practiced in secret, using torque buildup to bounce the P-47 off the runway. One bounce, one skip. Just enough lift. As he lifts off sideways at 42 feet, 20mm shells rake the air beneath him. The manual calls the trick suicidal. This is Germany, March 1945. A dying airfield outside Kassel. And Dale just broke the first rule of combat takeoff. And now they're chasing him. 3 months before Kassel, in a quiet stateside airfield near Amarillo, Texas. Dale Rensler had tried something unapproved. His instructors were walking the line routine engine checks when they spotted his P-47 Thunderbolt lurch forward with an awkward bounce just 300 feet down the strip. He wasn't supposed to lift off yet. The takeoff run was only halfway done. But the plane lifted early briefly, then settled again before climbing out with a rough climb angle of barely 6 degrees. When he taxied back, the crew chief shook his head. "That wasn't a takeoff," he muttered. "That was a ricochet." The instructors weren't amused. They'd seen Dale surge the throttle from 50% to 85% in just under 1.3 seconds, compressing the oil pump, generating torque imbalance and momentarily lifting the nose gear. This technique, sometimes called a cold start skip by ground crews, was known and banned. The P-47 weighed over 10,000 lbs empty. Its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial needed careful throttle curve to avoid torque roll. Surge it too early with cold oil pressure, and the results could be catastrophic. "You try that on a real strip," his CO barked, "and you'll skip once, stall, and die." They logged the maneuver in his file, "Unauthorized throttle acceleration under non-warm engine conditions." Dale had heard that line 3 times already. But he kept thinking back to a different problem: runways, back in Amarillo. He'd seen multiple training strips freeze overnight. One even shortened from 1,300 feet of usable surface to 800. On paper, the P-47 needed 1,200 feet minimum to clear trees at takeoff weight. But what about in the field? What about under fire? Would anyone give them a perfect runway then? He started practicing the trick off-record, early mornings, low visibility. Cold starts. He'd wait until the engine barely reached 80 degrees C, then push throttle fast, kicking right rudder early and nudging the stick for 4 degrees of nose lift. The plane would hop twice, and if he got the bounce timing right, the second skip would lift just enough to build airflow over the control surfaces. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. He never used it during any graded check rides. He never spoke of it again. Until Kassel. Because at Kassel, the makeshift strip was 900 feet long, muddy, icy near the east end. His squadron had been caught refueling mid-cycle. Only one order had come down the chain scramble immediately. No warm-ups, get airborne. And the shortest runway, the one no one wanted, was assigned to Rensler, the one that required a miracle. According to the U.S. Army Air Force's Field Manual 140, scramble procedures required a warm engine cycle of at least 60 seconds, manifold pressure at 35 inches ash, and a full throttle test to ensure radial stability before takeoff. The P-47 Thunderbolt's climb rate, 2,700 feet under ideal conditions, depended entirely on engine temp and runway length. On paper, the procedure was ironclad warm. Roll, rotate at 110 mph. Clear trees by the 1,000-foot mark. But Kassel's forward field had no paper. The 362nd Fighter Group had been leapfrogging into Germany ahead of the infantry columns. Their airstrips were improvised, this one carved out from an old road near a frozen cabbage field. It was 987 feet from threshold to the tree line. That was with no ice. But the eastern end, where Dale's P-47 was positioned, had a sheen of morning frost. Ground crews had used gasoline to melt it unsuccessfully. It was March 1945. The war was ending. But the killing wasn't. Recon flights the night before had spotted a Luftwaffe patrol pattern 40 miles out. 8 Messerschmitts Bf-109Gs cruising at low altitude and doubling back toward the field. Command wasn't surprised. Germany had started targeting parked aircraft. Strafing attacks on fuel-laden birds, wipe them out before they even leave the ground. Dale's squadron had 2 minutes' notice, 1 minute to suit up, 20 seconds to throttle up, and no time to warm engines. Runway number 3 was given to Dale not by malice but by lottery. 3 runways, 1 long, 1 muddy, 1 frozen. His was the last one open. 900 usable feet. If you were generous, no tailwind. Slight crosswind 8 Maishi Bayadinmun from the west. He flicked the mags. Primer, ignition. The P-47 coughed once, then roared. Oil temp 62 degrees C. Too cold. Engine RPM 900 and climbing. Not high enough. His crew chief waved him forward but mouthed a warning. You don't have it. Dale knew. According to everything he'd been taught, the correct call was to taxi clear and let warmer aircraft scramble. He hesitated for half a second. Looked left, another P-47 was stuck in mud. Looked right, 2 hadn't even started engines. He was the only one who could go. But if he followed the manual, he wouldn't make the tree line. He looked down, saw the torque lever, knew the bounce timing, knew the skip radius. He'd only tried it 6 times before, but never under fire. Never with death coming at 200 miles per hour. And then he heard it, the first warning siren from the north. They were inbound, from the tower perch. The field commander watched 6 Bf-109s emerge from low cloud cover. 4.5 miles out, flying wedge formation. Angle of descent 7 degrees, closure rate 210 mm. 20 seconds. No more. He yelled into the field comm, abort takeoff, repeat. Abort too late. But Dale didn't abort. He kicked right rudder and eased throttle manifold pressure at 27 inches. Still below power curve. The engine hadn't reached full RPM. It was spitting smoke, not thrust. Runway ground speed 62 miles per hour. Oil temp 67 degrees. He was rolling but not lifting. The enemy dropped to 1,400 feet, still outside 50 cal range. 2 of them split low diving to 800 feet. Strafing run confirmed. Dale's hands were slick inside the gloves. He yanked the brake release manually, hydraulic lag too slow. The P-47 lurched forward. The engine didn't want to play. Cold cylinders and 10 500-pound slums of steel argued with gravity. At 700 feet down the strip, he was still under 80 Mondipyampa. 1 Messerschmitt split off from the lead and began diving directly at runway number 3. A direct gun pass. Dale's left gear hit a soft patch, jerked sideways. His airspeed hit 85 mph. Engine RPM 1870, still not enough. The canopy rattled under crosswind. Wind from the west. 8 mph. He corrected 2 degrees with rudder, holding against drag. He reached for the switch, time 14 seconds. He didn't think. He threw the throttle forward fast, full 85% surge in 1.2 seconds. The cold start trick. The forbidden skip. Nose lifted, tail dropped. The plane bounced once at 92 mph. RPM 2400. Torque spike. Flaps at 5 degrees. The skip lifted the aircraft to 19 feet, then 7 feet again, then 42. He was airborne. Gear not retracted. RPM screaming. Engine redlining at 2650. He banked left to 14 degrees to gain time he didn't have. The Bf-109's first 20mm cannon burst hit dirt 5 feet behind his tail wheel. He was up, but just barely. Behind him. The next two P-47s hadn't moved. One had engine trouble. The other had panicked and flooded fuel mix. Dale was alone. At 130 feet altitude. His climb rate was 400 feet min. He wasn't outclimbing. He was crawling skyward. The German leader watched the Thunderbolt rise awkwardly and signaled the group to split. One dove to flank. Two went wide. They weren't just strafing now. They were hunting. And Dale had only bought seconds. One wrong angle, and they'd all be on him. The P-47 didn't climb. It clawed. Dale held his bank angle at 14 degrees, bleeding speed for altitude, nose high and vibrating. At 49 feet, he cleared the final treetop, its upper limbs brushing the undercarriage. He forced the gear up, ignoring the manual's order to wait until 500 feet. The gear protested, one leg dragging before locking with a mechanical clunk. Behind him, one Bf-109 overshot his expected flight path. The German pilot had assumed the Thunderbolt couldn't lift in time. His trajectory was too shallow. He missed Dale by 300 yards, overshooting the strip and pulling up fast to avoid terrain. That gave Dale the only gift he'd get: 2 seconds. Throttle full. RPM steady at 2 to 650 prop pitch adjusted for max climb. He nosed up gently, settling into a controlled ascent at 155 mph indicated airspeed. But it wasn't smooth. The aircraft trembled. Oil temp read just 75 degrees CC. Cold cylinders meant inefficient combustion. The right wing dipped, fighting torque. Then he made a decision that broke every pattern drilled into him in Amarillo. He angled directly toward the rising sun, not to blind the enemy, but to mask his climb rate. The Bf-109s were adjusting, fanning out into a horizontal crescent. One dove again, but pulled up early, uncertain if Dale was climbing fast or simply disappearing into glare. At 320 yards, he passed harmlessly beneath Dale's flight path. It worked. For now. Dale reached 700 feet, but the climb was fragile. Any jink would stall him. He looked left, no wingman. He looked right, nothing but horizon. His radio was dead. The cold start had fried the lower amp relay common when voltage was forced through cold circuits. He tapped the dial. Nothing. Switched channels. Static. He was flying solo. No eyes. No voice. And they were still behind him. He turned shallow to avoid straight line, tracking 8 degrees to port. Fuel dropped to 80%. Engine temp creeping toward green. But the sky ahead was empty. For a moment, just a moment. It felt like escape, until the rearview mirror caught a glint. One of the Germans hadn't climbed. He'd lagged low, flanked left, and was now rising fast up from 300 feet. A pure vertical intercept. Dale had maybe 5 seconds before convergence. The trick had worked. But now he had no energy advantage, no altitude to dive, and only one chance to reset the fight. And the Luftwaffe wasn't fooled twice. This time, they aimed where he would be. At 100 feet, Dale's climb flattened. The Thunderbolt's power curve dipped as expected. He eased back on throttle manifold pressure at 35 inches, HG, trying to balance speed and altitude. But he wasn't alone anymore. The Bf-109s had adapted. 2 German fighters held altitude at 200 feet, matching his arc. One dropped to 400 feet and climbed beneath him on a curving intercept. The rest pulled wide to both flanks, forming a hook around his projected flight path. They weren't chasing, they were herding. Dale recognized the pattern. It was a claw. They'd seen his vertical burst. Now they wanted him to commit again, to bleed energy into another climb, so they could trap his glide path on the way down. The German leader, likely an Eastern Front veteran, was thinking ahead by 15 seconds. And Dale had no one to watch his 6. His altimeter read 270 feet. Engine temp 82 degrees C. RPM stable. But the power band was thin now. He couldn't climb much more without stalling the cooling system. He nosed down 3 degrees, trying to convert altitude into forward speed, but it was too late. One of the BF-109s flashed upward on his right, cutting the angle. He was now boxed from 2 sides, one above, one level, and one rising behind. In a simulator, the escape would be a dive. In real life, he'd never make it through the torque stall. The German pilot behind him fired. 2 cannon shells zipped over the left wing. Dale rolled right. Tight, too tight. His nose dropped too fast. Airspeed surged from 150 to 190 in 3 seconds. He pulled back hard. G-forces hit 3. 8 Gs, borderline blackout. The Thunderbolt shook, but it held, now at 150 feet. But he had no path. The Germans weren't chasing, they were walling him in. Then came the real threat. A BF-109 dove from above, straight down his line. Not a shot, just a force out. It would push Dale's nose down and force him into a low-altitude trap. It worked. He broke left. Altitude 880 feet. Fuel flow surged, RPM dipped. That's when the mix sputtered. Not engine failure, just a drop in rich burn efficiency. It happened when the climb flattened too fast. Now his cockpit was screaming. Warning chirp stall threshold. Speed 142 mph and dropping. The next burst came from below. German tracers arced upward, missing by 4 feet. The Luftwaffe wasn't chasing him anymore. They were steering him toward the ground, and he was running out of sky. Then the engine hiccuped again hard, and a red warning light blinked at 6,300 feet. He had 1 second to decide whether to dive or die. The cockpit jolted. The engine coughed again. Harder this time, 1 full misfire from cylinder 4. Dale's hands tightened around the stick. He'd heard the sound in training. Fuel starvation. Caused when rich mix gets pulled unevenly during steep pitch shifts. Instructors warned it gives you 1 warning cough. The next is flameout. Altimeter 5, 800 feet and falling. Airspeed 137 mph. Nose yaw 12 degrees to port uncommanded. He tapped right rudder, tried to level out. The plane resisted. Tracers sliced through the sky, 3 streaks passing just under the right wing root. One exploded into a puff of white near the fuselage. He couldn't tell if it was a near miss or a hit. The Thunderbolt groaned in the turn. Torque was biting back now. RPM was unstable, 2,300 and bouncing. Dale looked at the cylinder head temp, still in yellow but dropping. The climb had drained energy. The engine didn't like the air mix at this pitch. He tried to roll level, too much. He overcorrected. The aircraft rolled past neutral into a shallow left bank. Stall alarm chirped once. Then again, he yanked back on the stick too hard. Speed dropped to 128 mph. He felt it nose dip, wingtip tremble, stall imminent. Dale instinctively released back pressure, but the German fighters had already seen it. 2 moved in. 1 BF-109 rose up from below, closing from 280 yards. The other crossed above, then dropped in an S pattern, trying to bait him into a turn. He didn't bite. Couldn't. Instead, he forced the nose down 5 degrees, building airspeed to 145 mph. Then the real problem appeared. Through the glare. His mirror caught movement. 1 more fighter. Dead 6, nose pointed directly at his spine. He rolled right to break line. Too slow. A cannon round hit just aft of the cockpit. Not a direct hit, but close enough. The fuselage jolted. The Thunderbolt skipped sideways. Smoke. Not fire, just panel damage. The German behind him now had the shot. Dale saw the shadow creeping up on his right wing. He couldn't outrun, couldn't outturn. He tried 1 last roll to bleed angle. Overrolled again. The nose dipped. Altimeter spun 5,100. 4,980 feet. Now the sky was chaotic, no up, no down. Only angles and airspeed warnings. RPM 100, power dying. Then he saw it. A mistake. The BF-109 climbing below had gotten too eager, pulled vertical too early. It was about to lose speed in Dale's lower right quadrant. That was his only window. He kicked full left rudder, slapped throttle to 90%, let the torque spin the aircraft into its own turn. The Thunderbolt yawed violently, speed dropping to 122 mph. But it flipped inside the German's rise. Just 1 second. That's all he had. He squeezed the trigger. 450 cals lit up tracers flashing into blue sky. No hits, but enough to make the German bank off. Dale stabilized barely, but now he was down to 4,780 feet, alone, shaken, and nearly out of maneuver space. And the engine still wasn't giving him full power. His next turn had to count, or he'd never get another. The trick wasn't in the climb, it was in the torque. Most P-47 pilots feared low-speed turns. The Thunderbolt was big, heavy, and at under 140 mph, it hated rapid direction changes. Its massive propeller, 12 feet in diameter, generated yaw torque that could stall the left wing and hard right banks. That's what the manuals drilled in: avoid abrupt maneuvers below 5,000 feet unless your speed was stable. But Dale had ignored one part of that logic. He'd learned that torque wasn't just a danger. It was also leverage, back in Amarillo. He'd studied a maneuver taught unofficially by ground instructors, never in flight school. They called it a torque roll pivot. Instead of fighting the engine's spin in a stall-prone turn, you timed the roll with throttle surge and rudder kick to harness the twist itself. It only worked when speed was borderline, and it cost you altitude. But it let the aircraft snap inside a tighter arc than it should have been able to fly. There were rules. First, throttle up hard, but not past 90%. You needed just enough torque to rotate but not flip. Second, kick hard opposite rudder to delay the yaw, then let it snap. Third, never do it below 3,000 feet. You'd bleed altitude too fast to recover. Dale was at 4,780 feet when he used it. He'd seen the climbing BF-109 approach too steep. Most pilots would bank away. But that let the enemy line up your trajectory. Instead, Dale surged throttle, kicked rudder left, and let the Thunderbolt yaw into a torque-driven roll. It wasn't pretty. It yanked the airframe sideways, nearly flat spinning, but it swung the nose 40 degrees inside the German's angle, enough to break the lock. He hadn't even aimed, just pointed the guns and fired a warning burst. That wasn't the trick. The real value was the reset. Now the Luftwaffe had to reacquire him, not just chase him. And that gave Dale the one thing his aircraft was designed to exploit: vertical space. The P-47 Thunderbolt couldn't outturn a BF-109, but it could dive. It could accelerate in a straight line better than anything the Germans had in the air. Dale knew it. He glanced at engine temp, holding steady at 86 degrees C. Fuel 62%. Airspeed climbing 144, 158, 165 mph. He didn't climb, he didn't roll. He went neutral and began the dive. 2 German fighters turned to follow, but they had a problem. They'd spent altitude chasing him. They couldn't outdive him now. And the BF-109s had thinner airframes not built to handle the same stress loads. The moment Dale leveled at 4,200 feet, he nosed down again, shallow, just 7 to go, enough to build speed. The Germans committed too late, and Dale's airspeed hit 230 mph just as the last fighter locked guns, setting up the twist that would break their formation. Dale's airspeed passed 230 mph. The Thunderbolt stabilized slightly, nose down, 7-degree angle, gaining energy with every second. The altimeter ticked down 4,200, 3,900, 3,600 feet. The 2 BF-109s behind him followed too close, too fast. German tracers cut past his left wing. One round struck the tail fin, no critical damage, but too close. 3. Dale tightened his grip. He checked engine RPM 550. Torque was right where he needed it. Manifold pressure, 38 inches, HK. His aircraft was now in its best state, not slow and gasping, but fast, heavy. and dangerous. 2. He kicked the rudder hard left. At 300 12 the Thunderbolt's tail swung wide, then he pushed the stick full right. The aircraft didn't turn, it pivoted. That was the trick. With a high torque load and rudder imbalance, the big fighter skidded sideways for half a second, shedding 15 yards but breaking the German's aim. 1. He pulled back 35% on the stick. Nose rising fast, angle of attack jumped to 19 degrees. 1 Bf-109 behind him tried to follow, but at this angle, their wings weren't designed to hold lift. The Messerschmitt stalled out of the dive at 3,200 feet, wobbling mid-air. Dale passed under him, inverted, and rolled left. Now he was behind them. The Thunderbolt bled speed, dropping to 272 mph, but he had the angle. Gun switch armed, distance 270 yards. He held fire. The Germans split one high, one flat. Dale picked the flat one. He closed to 220 yards, then 200. Speed, 290 IEMA. Altitude 800 feet. He fired. 4 50 caliber Brownings roared. 2-second burst. Tracers laced through the Bf-109's tail, then the right wing. Debris peeled off. The German jerked right, trying to roll, but his elevator was gone. Dale didn't watch him go down. He banked hard left, chasing the second, now at 200 to 600 feet. The second Messerschmitt climbed, trying to reverse. Dale pulled vertical nose high, flaps out 10 degrees. At 180 mph, the Thunderbolt climbed like a rock, not pretty, but steady. RPM 2480, oil temp holding at 90 degrees. The German stalled first. He flipped sideways, wings flat to the ground, trying to yaw out. Dale cut throttle slightly, angled up 3 degrees and pulled trigger again. Another burst. This time, no tracers missed. The Bf-109's left wing shredded. Smoke burst from the cowling. The fighter spun once, then disappeared below. 2 down. Dale looked around, no immediate threats. Just vapor trails and sky. Altitude 200 feet. Fuel 48%. No radio. No friendlies in sight. But he'd done it. 6 fighters had hunted him for 2 full minutes. Only 2 dared follow him into the dive. And both were gone. The torque trick, the one that was called reckless, had flipped the script, but he'd burned oil, lost radio, and was still 80 miles from his nearest base. Then the oil pressure warning lit up steady yellow. If he didn't ease engine load fast, it would seize, and there were still 2 enemy fighters unaccounted for. Oil pressure warning held steady yellow light, blinking every 2 seconds. Dale throttled back to 68%. RPM dropped to 150. The engine responded, but not happily. Cylinder head temp was holding at 92 degrees E, but oil temp had risen to 108 degrees C. He had minutes, maybe less, before the bearings would overheat. The Thunderbolt needed airspeed, not stress. He leveled out at 200 feet and set a 12 degrees heading east, back toward the coast. Still 80 miles away. Fuel read 46%. Airspeed 248 mph. Every number said the same thing: this plane wasn't going to make it home if he stayed in the fight. But that assumed the fight was over. Then he saw it, 2 black specks, low on the horizon. 7 o'clock rear, slowly gaining. He angled the mirror. Bf-109s. The 2 who had stayed wide during the earlier pursuit. They hadn't burned energy in the climb. They were fresh. They were coming. Dale had 3 options. Option 1, dive low, full throttle, run fast and straight. But his oil temp would spike past 120 degrees, engine failure almost guaranteed. Option 2, climb, force them into a drag-out chase and try to make them stall again. But he'd already used the torque twist, no altitude left to burn. And no ammo to bluff a second time. Option 3, trick them one more time. He watched their angles. They were 500 yards back and closing fast. He toggled his wingtip to bait them small left-right corrections, pretending he hadn't seen them. Airspeed 265 mph. Fuel 43%. He waited. At 900 yards, they began to split. One went high angle of climb 10 degrees. The other stayed low. Classic scissor kill box. He let them close. At 600 yards, tracers ripped past his canopy far right. The high one had guessed too early. He pulled throttle back fast, dropped to 40%, airframe decelerated violently. Speed dropped to 211 mph in 2 seconds. The low fighter overshot, appearing in front of him. Dale didn't shoot. He had no rounds left, but he didn't need to. He yanked throttle to 85%, full right rudder, nose 6 degrees low. The Thunderbolt surged. He rolled left, slipped under the German, and gained distance in the blind spot. The high 109 looped around, but too late. Dale wasn't diving. He was skipping. Small pitch changes. Burst throttle. Every move designed to keep speed up without overheating the engine. Oil pressure stabilized barely. Airspeed back to 236 mph. Fuel 39%. The Germans gave up the chase at 1900 feet. They pulled off. Why? They hadn't seen a gun burst, no tracers. They thought he was out of ammo and too far to catch without fuel risk. They turned west. Dale held east, but his engine was breathing heavy. He needed a place to land, and fast. Then the prop governor surged, RPM jumped to 2,450 uncommanded, and a new problem lit the dash runaway prop, just 22 miles from the coast. The prop governor surged again. RPM now spiked to 2,600, unstable. Dale cut throttle to idle manifold pressure, dropped below 18 inches. HG, but the prop kept spinning. He was losing engine control. The Thunderbolt shook at 2,100 feet. Oil pressure back in red. Airspeed 202 mph. Fuel 35%. He had 22 miles to make it to the forward emergency strip on Elahuera Atoll, a coral strip carved into a Pacific reef. Wind was 8 mph across from the left. Runway length just 200 feet. Not ideal for a P-47 coming in hot with a malfunctioning prop. He descended fast. Shallow 4 degrees, trying to keep RPM in the 2,400 range. Any faster, and the engine might overspeed into seizure. Any slower, and he risked dropping below safe glide. He radioed nothing. The set was dead. But the ground crew saw him. One flare popped from the east end of the strip. At 100 feet, flaps out 15 degrees, gear still up. He adjusted pitch and scanned the gauges. Oil temp 117 degrees. RPM bouncing between 2,350 and 2,600. His margin was 0. At 600 feet, he dropped the gear manually. It didn't lock. Hydraulic pressure was gone. He yanked the emergency hand pump 5 strokes. 10, 15 metal groaning. Then 2 loud clunks. He didn't wait. At 420 feet, speed at 162 mph. He committed. Final descent, flaps to 40 degrees. Stick steady. Nose aligned with the western threshold. The strip rushed up fast. He touched down at 138 mph, 25 mph over safe landing speed. The tires screeched. No bounce. But the plane didn't want to stop. He pumped the toe brakes. Felt nothing. Hydraulics were out. He ground the rudder left. Into the wind. Friction braking. The Thunderbolt slowed barely. At 110 yards from the reef's edge, it skidded sideways and halted. Smoke curled from the cowling. The engine sputtered once, then died. Dale exhaled. He opened the canopy and waved, then immediately began unbuckling. The crew ran toward him, but he grabbed the side panel first, tore out the gun camera cassette. He knew what was on it. That footage showed everything: the dive, the twist, the overshoots, the burst that clipped the second BF-109, and the silence at the end, proof he hadn't fired in the final escape. Debrief came 3 hours later. The officer read the maintenance report aloud. Prop governor fried, radio shorted. 2 of the 450 cals jammed after the second burst. Unauthorized torque roll executed at 4,700 feet, the CO said. Eyes fixed. Manual says 7,000 minimum. Dale just sat there. They couldn't punish him, but they didn't reward him either. The kill claims were unofficial. No witnesses, no gun camera during the final 2 shots, film jammed during the last roll. But the ground crews whispered. The crew chief shook Dale's hand and taped the tail with 2 red stripes. Unofficial. Unofficial, but understood. Then a second pilot, days later, copied the torque twist, this time at 800 feet. His wingman saw it work, and command couldn't stop the rumors. By the end of that week, 3 more pilots attempted the torque pivot maneuver during live sorties. None reported it in official logs, but the maintenance crews noticed the signs heat bloom near the rudder servo, strain lines on the prop collar, and inconsistent flap cycle marks. The Thunderbolt wasn't supposed to turn like that below 5,000 feet. Yet something was happening. The trick had a new name now. Dead Man's Skip. It passed from mouth to mouth, not in flight briefings, but over coffee, under wings, and in midnight tool tents. Pilots stopped saying roll into the fight and started saying snap the skip. The instructors didn't teach it. They couldn't. But they heard about it and warned against it. Every pilot knew try it wrong, and you lost altitude fast, less than 3,000 feet. You were buying a farm, but the stats didn't lie. Over 22 missions between March and May 1944. 5 confirmed kills were credited to Thunderbolts performing irregular lateral rolls below glide arc. That's what the language became in the report's bureaucratic smoke to hide a field-borne tactic. The Germans noticed. Interrogated Luftwaffe prisoners began mentioning impossible lateral cuts and sudden yaw spins from P-47s that shouldn't have had the energy. One captured ace claimed the aircraft must have stalled and fallen, but it didn't. It turned like it was on a hook. Dale's name never appeared in the reports. Officially, he had 0 confirmed kills. Unofficially, his footage was studied by 2 separate squadrons. Someone made copies. Someone showed it to instructors at Bellows Field. Within 2 months, young pilots entering theater used a new phrase in pre-flight rituals. If you're out of sky skip and snap, no one taught it. No one admitted it. But more than one German fighter went down to a move that wasn't supposed to work. Then in June, a Thunderbolt pulled it off at just 2,600 feet and lived. The squadron called him reckless, but the kill was real, and whispers turned into a shadow doctrine. Dale Mathers flew 3 more missions in the same P-47 before the engine finally seized mid-climb over Bougainville. He bailed out at 7,200 feet, landed with a dislocated shoulder, and was pulled from combat rotation at just 19 years old. Officially, he had no confirmed kills, no medals. His name appeared in one after-action log misspelled. His Thunderbolt was recovered, stripped for parts, and eventually used for training at a maintenance depot near Espiritu Santo. No nose art, no kill marks, no preservation, just a bent airframe with a reputation. Crewmen said it shook different when it turned. One even swore it kicked sideways on its own. Dale never flew combat again. But years later, in 1946, during a stateside training review, an instructor demonstrated a low-altitude torque reversal to cadets without naming its origin, just calling it the pivot brake. Nobody linked it to Dale. But the move stayed. The manuals never adopted it. The Air Force never endorsed it. But in Korea, early F-86 pilots whispered of a close-quarters roll using throttle surge and rudder kick just like the jugs used to do. They didn't know where it came from. They didn't need to. Because when the sky was too small and the enemy too close, every pilot knew the logic when you run out of turn. Use the spin. Today, no one calls it the dead man's skip. But the math lives on. The physics never changed. And somewhere, in a blurry reel of salvaged gun camera footage, a teenage pilot snaps his P-47 sideways in the blue Pacific sky and escapes 6 enemy fighters with a trick no one told him to try.